Welcome back, everyone. We have our final panel for today, and then we'll have two more talks right after this. Our panel today is going to be talking about the impact of recent advancements in AI on academia. And we're very lucky to have a terrific panel here. Let's start with Jules White. He's Associate Dean for Strategic Learning Programs, Associate Professor of Computer Science. He's also heading the AI Committee for the CS department, and he's also a lead author on that little snippet that you saw of the prompt engineering and the prompt design catalogs. That was, largely his paper, graduate students as well, and then co-author with Doug Schmidt and myself. But we're getting I think it's an important paper and providing really great guidance. And also, I'd like to say that Jules had one of the most fascinating early uses of the Chat GPT, where he had a game of a security system where he actually interacted with Chat GPT with it, playing the part not just of a security expert, also of a Linux window, and discovered just how deeply you can engage with these models for learning. We also have Professor Alex Christensen, who I introduced earlier. You got to hear his fascinating talk about assessing the personalities of models, and also using models to explore the concept of personality, and his research with letters from Jenny. And then we also have Professor Charreau Bell, who is a professor of the practice in computer science, also a senior data scientist on our data science team, and is also director of the data science minor. She's also a quadruple door, which I love mentioning, but has been working with deep learning models since the beginning of her graduate career. So thank you all very much for being here and for taking part of the panel. So let's give a round of applause for our panelists. And I have a tough question, same one, but a little bit altered from what I asked the panel for the previous panels. Choose one, just one major impact on academia that you see from the recent developments in AI models. You can only choose one, but audience, you can ask for others if you'd like as well. Jules.
So I'm going to start with what I think is the easiest one, which is, a year from now, I think that when our students are going to get jobs, if they really understand how to use these tools, they're going to be at a huge competitive advantage. And 3 years from now, if they don't know how to use these tools, they're going to have a hard time getting a job, is what my prediction is. Now, I could be wrong. So I think the very first sort of impact we're going to have is we really have to rethink, how do we bring this into the things that we teach? How do we make sure that our students are experts at using these tools, and that Vanderbilt is known as a place of graduating people who are not only experts in their discipline, but also experts in using these advancements as they come out? Because there's, I think, no question in my mind that they're going to have huge potential in almost every discipline. So the huge impact is going to be, how do we, within each discipline, teach students the skills they need in terms of leveraging these techniques, but also just sort of generally educating them on things like prompt patterns and prompt engineering in general. And sort of it's going to become, I think, like basic computing. Before, computing to some degree in programming was within computer science, but I think it's going to become much broader. So you don't have to be a computer scientist, you don't have to be a programmer. Anybody can start essentially programming, in my mind, using Chat GPT or tools like it, because that's essentially what you're doing. So I think the first big change is we're going to have to teach our students how to be masters of these tools and become known for being experts in using this. So that's the easy one, I think.
Am I next? Okay. I think I might be answering a different question than what you answered. But what I'm most excited about in terms of the new technology and how it will apply to academia and the curriculum is really seeing how this technology can help bridge the divide in people with different learning styles, especially when some people's learning styles are a little bit incompatible with the person that's teaching them. And so, for example, something that I noticed with a really good friend of mine is that he is extremely visual. So he can draw a CAD design and it can be like a masterpiece. It's like 3D, it can be intricate. Whatever you ask him to do, the man can make it happen. And so he was really interested in learning how to program. And so I was like, of course, you just go and you take this Python tutorial and it'll be fine. And he had the hardest time with it. But then he found this programming language that is actually like visual first. So you have a function which creates a sphere on a screen. And this is actually the way that he learned how to program. They're using this more visual programming language that actually translated directly to things which he could see, because he's also quite visual. And so I'm just looking forward to the possibility of these models being able to, I don't know, like at the same time, in parallel, when someone is learning in a particular way in the classroom, the model can help to adjust to a particular kind of different person who has a different type of way that they learn best. And so I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, totally. So I think you both said everything I could have possibly thought. So I'm going to try to take maybe a narrower, more specific focus. And I think what it's going to change the most will be what we value. So in the sense of I don't know how valuable programming will continue to be. I think while programming will change, I think the days of, for example, sitting down, base R, like this is how you get a column, this is how you get a row, or Python, even just like this is how you apply this machine learning model. It already does that very, very well. So I think what we will start to value more is, I think, what y'all have already talked about here is how do we prompt and get the information that we want out of the models and build those skills of how to get the information out of these models and use them most productively. And then on the other side of that, how do we leverage then our own knowledge? I think we still will need a lot of knowledge. So this is where still having good, solid foundational education comes in. But then how we validate and make sure the credibility of the information that's coming out is correct. And so how we can most beneficially use that information that's coming out, or at least making sure that that information is proper. And I think to that degree, then the skills that we value, I think will still be similar: critical thinking, the ability to think through problem solving and things like that. But I think the way in which we go about doing those things, which will then affect everything downstream, how we educate and teach, and how we then go forward and do these things in practice in the real world and in jobs, we will have to really evaluate, I think, the general values and the way in which the skills that we teach those values.
I want to follow up on Charreau's thing, because I think this is a huge thing that's undervalued, is that the sort of personalized learning thing. I think that's, in my own experience with it, there was maybe a week or two ago, I wanted to learn a new topic and I went and bought $100 of books on the topic and I started reading about it, and I got to this point and I'm like, but it doesn't address this question I have. And then I thought, but ChatGPT can. And I went and I typed it in and it gave me an answer. And then, I had to still reason about, like, is the answer correct? But then I could follow up with very detailed, specific questions, and then I could have it, put it into a particular context that I cared about, as opposed to, the book was like a jumping off point, but then ChatGPT became this tool that I could like explore it in more depth in a way that was like specific to me, personalized to my interests. I think that's a huge thing that's going to have, people think of it as like, well, it can help you answer the quiz question, but it can also help you learn the material better in the first place. So I think that's huge.
Thank you. Let's open this up to questions from the audience.
Thank you, guys. This is really exciting. I love the idea of the different learning styles. One of the questions regarding the skill sets you need to have now and train towards about like prompt engineering, et cetera. We've come a very long way with interacting with computers from, like the command line to graphical user interfaces to now natural language. But even still with natural language, we're still having to prompt engineer. Is this going to be something will even evolve beyond? Like certainly they're not going to be clairvoyant. That would be pretty scary. Even when you're dialoguing with people, you're kind of like prompt engineering. You're trying to like say the right thing to get them to do the right thing. But at what point or what needs to happen and can it happen where it is not so much even a skill set you have to have, like they just understand you better? Like, do they just need more context about what you're needing to solve and how you've solved it before? How can we move even beyond prompt engineering? And is that even possible?
So I think that I mean, again, it's early days, but I think that the trajectory we're on is it will probably look less and less important over time. I think you'll always have, I think there will always be some skill to it. But I think that one of the things we'll maybe learn to is kind of like user interface or something where, over time we'll learn how to fine tune how it responds to language to make it so that it is either easier to use for a particular discipline. So I think that might be one thing, is you make it so that the natural way that you would interact with it from a particular discipline will get you the highly optimized output. So I think maybe it could evolve in that direction. It may be just that the models get bigger and the size of the context gets bigger to where you can just dump so much into it, it gives you the right output maybe. But I think of it kind of like, even if you have a human being who's really an expert, you still have a conversation, you still go back and forth, and the better you are at explaining yourself and what you want, the better the person's going to be able to help you. And so I think that there's probably going to always be some aspect of that. I don't know for certain, but that would be my guess. There's always be some, need to, in some ways write well, and be detailed and, use make the right word choices in what you're doing.
Yeah, I wonder to that respect, and I know that this is something Jesse's talked about, is the extent to which you can have it ask you questions. So maybe you're not the best at giving it information, or you're learning, so you don't have all the information, you don't have the full picture. And so it can maybe then prompt you to try to you can give it the knowledge that you're looking for. At least here's the knowledge you have. And it can tell you maybe that information that you're missing. It may already be able to do this right now with enough of what's there. But I think it's hard to know sometimes what you don't know, right? If you don't know what you don't know. And so finding those gaps in your knowledge, I think, again, I echo what y'all are saying of like, I think this can be one of the most powerful education tools we can have, in the sense that it can work with us to identify where knowledge is missing. And I think eventually, I hope this is where it goes, is over time, it will find where we're maybe missing knowledge, and we can then leverage that to gain the knowledge in places that we don't have it.
I also wonder the extent to which it will, like these models will somewhat train us a little bit about how to interact with them. Because I'm thinking back about even Google itself, like Googling, people will talk about Googling something as a skill, and it's a skill which you learn over time. And I just wonder the extent to which we'll be doing the same thing with these types of models by asking it a really good question with something, or prompting it with a really good prompt in an area that we're super familiar with. We learn how to extend that into other areas and maybe try to get a similar kind of answer.
And we have a question from online from Kevin. What about student writing? How might writing assignments need to change? I realize that none of you are actually teaching that, but
So I'll take a stab at this one. So my father is a professor of creative writing, so we've had a lot of fun discussing ChatGPT and doing examples together because he finds this fascinating. And I mean, so he's fascinated and excited by it because he thinks it's absolutely this amazing capability. And so we played around with asking it to write, we'll give it a particular scene and we'll ask it to write it in the style of a particular author. And the result inevitably is like subpar, So, you know, it's good at like, in some ways I would say, giving some baseline average level of language to some degree of that sort of topic maybe. But I don't think you're gonna get, you know, great writer X. Now, maybe in the future we will, but I think there's always going to be, by design, maybe because we train it and you're sort of training off of statistics, and you know, you're going to have like, it's going to probably look like the average. And so I think there's always the opportunity for people to, you know, need to know how to write well. You know, even when I've used it for producing text and things, like what it produces is like, you know, I heard somebody say, you know, what's really helpful to me is like, I always had the hardest time writing because I didn't know just where to start. But if it produces something, even if I don't use it, just because I read it, that gets me going and sort of thinking, and then I go and write what I'm actually going to write. You know, I've had people make that statement to it. And so I think at the end of the day, you still need to know how to write. Now, there may be people who go and just cut and paste what it is, but then they'll always be stuck in the mean, right? So if your goal is to be, you know, exactly average, you know, then you can, you know, you can baseline yourself. You can put a floor of where you're writing. So I think there's always going to be a need to improve the writing. I mean, the same thing I think for the generative art. You know, if you look at what it does, like it's going to produce things that's based on what's been done before, and it may be really good at mimicking, but it's not going to create that next new thing. And so you want to do something entirely new, you know, you still need to go and perfect your craft and understand how to do it. That's my perspective, but I don't know. I'll hold out.
I have.
Great. And we had a question from Jesse.
Yeah, at first I thought he took my question, but I actually thought different. It's sort of like a follow-up, which is kind of given what you were just saying, Jules, perhaps like how do we think about assessment, right? That like how, because a lot of pedagogy relies on essays. Often it's essays summarizing something, which GPT is really good at. So like, I mean, I know as a professor, I also think about scale sometimes, right? That I have to worry about 30, 40, 50 students in a classroom, you know, and so essays have been helpful to or even essay questions, right? So it's almost like, just like with the calculator, you know, we can't assign times tables anymore because they've got calculators. Now it's like, we can't really do essay questions anymore because we got Chat GPT. So what do you think is the future of assessment?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up and kind of go with both, because I hope this is where we don't lose the human piece. And the reason for that is, so my PhD supervisor told me this at the start of my PhD, was that you learn about what you know and what you don't know through writing. So when you go to write about a topic, you'll figure out very quickly where it is the gaps you're missing in knowledge. So maybe we can leverage these tools to figure out where we don't know things, but we can also leverage them in writing to figure out where we can further improve our learning. And I think this is where, actually going to the art side of where we've looked at a study where all AI generated art from Midjourney, and we gave human versus AI labels to folks. And we then had people rate based on those labels, the artworks. And what we came to find out was, when it comes to the perceptual qualities of the artwork, it didn't matter, human or AI. Where it really mattered was the effort and the worth and the value and the meaning that came from the art. When it was generated by a human, there was much greater meaning and value assigned to that output. So what I'm hoping is that we can still do. Now, maybe we have to do handwritten assignments. I would hate that. I think that like takes us back a step in the level of production we can do. But I hope we can still have the values of using writing as a tool to express our own ideas and thoughts and knowledge. Because otherwise, right, we just become mouthpieces for the bot. And that's the last thing I think we really want to become.
I think also in terms of assessment, I just keep thinking that, so there's something that Jesse talks about regularly, which is with these models, we might be able to think of a more flipped approach to classroom instruction and what we give to the model or what we give to students versus what we might expect or what the model would do. And I just think, I don't know, I'm just pondering on what it will mean for instructors in particular and the extent to which we will end up. So I guess if you have an essay, you still have to read the essay and grade it. And then I'm just thinking about like, if you were to have some sort of interceding model, how you would leverage that model to be able to help you understand like certain components of it that are certain or uncertain. But also just flipping it completely. And then an example Jesse gives is having the model generate something. And then if the student thinks it's good, they can like turn it in, but turn in an evaluation of that thing as well. So it's not that you just turn in this thing, you also must evaluate and state what you think is good about the essay, what you think is horrible about the essay, where it's good and where it, falls short.
So I'm gonna narrow it down just to, teaching computer science. So, and I'm going to narrow it to the domain I know the best, which is like the software engineering in the class I'm teaching this semester. So I think of it as kind of an interesting, I have to rethink like, if you have this tool, what do you need to know? And how do we assess if you're grasping it? So one way I think it would be interesting, and, if it hadn't, if I teach this class, next year, what would I do differently? I think one thing would be probably expecting much more in terms of scale. So particularly in computer science, if you need a function or a class or whatever to do X, you can get some piece of it really easy. So you can get the pieces out really, really easy. And if you're confused about how to use the piece, or how a particular thing that you need to use works, you can go and ask ChatGPT. So you can get the bits of information. The hard part is still going and assembling it all. So we haven't quite solved for, hopefully we'll figure this out. And I'll put software engineers out of work. I don't know, sure it's the best thing for me, but I think it's a really fascinating problem. Can I take my own job, right? And teach the AI to eliminate me. And so, but I think right now we're getting lots of little pieces out. So I think for assignments, what's interesting is if you can get all the pieces, building blocks really easily, let's make somebody build a much bigger. So rather than do one, big software project for my class, maybe you do one that's 100 times larger, or you do it in 10 different languages. And you don't even know all the languages, or you do it, you do 10 different, assignments that are all equal to what you would have done before. So I think one way to do it is to think about, using it and really focusing on assessing is the person getting the sort of productivity multiplier out of it, and are they still able to take all of the individual like outputs and be sort of the conductor that puts them all together and architects it. To some degree, like if we think about computer science, it's kind of like this new compiler, right? Before you had to go and you'd like do punch cards or something. And then we went up one level of abstraction and we did it another way, and you had tools beneath you, gave you more productivity. And we kept going up, and then we just suddenly went like way up. And so I think of it kind of in that perspective is like really rethinking how to assess my students. But a big part of it is like going to really have to expect a lot more from them in terms of, scale of what they can do, and knowing that they can get the building blocks easily.
Cool. So you basically just started to touch on what I'm about to ask, but so I definitely think that this is going to be like transformative as far as like education, like having one-on-one tutors with students essentially. And that is great, and democratizing of knowledge and everything. At the same time, when this is happening against the backdrop of this intellectual, like cultural backlash against higher education, Gen Z seeing the millennials saddled with tons of debt, and being like, oh, that's a trap, going to college, whatever. And generally, like, how do we as academics and professors kind of still provide more than ChatGPT will as it gets better and better? How can we still justify like in real ways, like what can we do to make sure that we're still preserving something or innovating ourselves and change? How will the profession change in order to kind of keep serving students better than the computers so they don't take our jobs?
So I think I'll start. I believe I have some colleagues here that could answer this so much better than me and speak to what I'm about to speak to even better. But during COVID, with remote learning, there was a real difference between how students performed in the remote classroom versus when they were in person. And there's just something about being in person, which apparently has some sort of effect that, again, my brilliant colleagues here will be able to describe a little bit better. But abstracting from that, I just think that there will always be something to having a teacher to instruct you, just period. I think that I tend to think of generative AI, ML, machine learning. I always think about it as something that's a helper, but it's not as robust if it's just the doer. So it will help us to become better instructors. People can use this on its own to, like, for example, if you build it into some software, but I think as faculty armed with something like ChatGPT or GPT-4 or whatever have you, I think that that can really help us to enrich our teaching and increase it in such a level that it is providing immense amount of value to the students.
I agree completely. I think that there's always going to be some, also there's always going to be some people who are good at using it to learn, you know, and independently, just like now, you know, you have people that can go take the Coursera MOOCs and become experts and self-taught programmers. And there's other people who that just doesn't work for them, you know, and I think we'll probably be in a, you know, a similar place. It's kind of like, you know, when COVID came and all the restaurants put QR codes down, right? And some people loved scanning it with their phone and they're like, I can place my order from my phone. I have to do it. And other people were like, I really want to, you know, have wait staff that come and talk to me and interact with me. And so I think you'll always have different, you know, sort of styles. So I think there'll always be a place. I'm optimistic that it won't get rid of us. It'll just give us tools to make the experience, you know, even stronger. And what maybe the amount, I still think of it as more of a scaling tool, that it gives us the ability to teach maybe, you know, using a wider variety of styles, to a wider variety of learning styles, you know, bigger expectations on what can be accomplished and problems that can be solved, but doesn't eliminate the human yet. I don't think it will probably, but.
No, I also 100% agree. And this is a question I've been asking myself as the summer comes of how I can reinvent the courses I'll be teaching in the fall. One of them being the data science fundamentals course that I think this will be fundamental to data science. And so I think my goal is to figure out like how exactly can I make this experience still worth it to them? Because I think the scaling is such a wonderful, I think it's a teacher's dream to have the ability to have such detailed and person-specific feedback that these models can provide. That only accelerates the learning that we can do, and the teaching that we can do. So maybe this means that our courses can accelerate faster if they're able to learn and pick up material also faster. So I think the challenge then becomes, I think, thinking about how do we keep the person and perhaps more interactivity and making that a core or a much more focused or fundamental part of our courses to kind of team and integrate alongside these models as well as with each other.
Alex and I really love your point about elevating the like reasoning that the students are able to do like during the course. So for example, in trying to use code to solve a problem, it is currently, and it has been the case that you first have to learn how to code. So you might be sitting there for like an hour, just trying to figure out like this little minutia of something like ggplot, which is a package that you use in R to create this really nice plot. So now you're like all of your time is consumed by trying to create this plot instead of looking at the plot, thinking about what the plot is trying to answer, whether you're doing a good job at answering it using the plot. And this is really what I see as the power that's gonna like help us with this generative AI. Instead of focusing on like writing this like little minutia of the code and struggling through it, you're actually able to engage your brain on the thing that you're actually supposed to learn, which is supposed to be like the interpretation, the analysis of the results and of the data.
So how feasible is it to actually on one side have the technology advance, but then the assessment maybe go back, meaning having like oral exam. Like and so the reason I'm bringing this up is because like I got my education in Germany, and in the first year we had written exam, but even in math, after the second year we had an oral exam, and in physics too. And so you didn't sit there 45 minutes and scribble something on the piece of paper and did multiplication, but they basically ask you, okay, what is the first step? What are the main assumptions? What's the result? And what does it mean? And you were not allowed to bring a calculator, just a pencil and a piece of paper. And the really cool thing about this was that you had to really think on the spot. And this was a really great way to assess. And if you were very good, they just erased the level a little bit. And if you're not so good, they went a little bit lower. And so they could adjust individually. And so even people that got like a Fields Medal later got like a B at this test, okay, because the professors adjusted it. So I was wondering how feasible it is to bring like oral exam and more personalized time for education back, and in this way make it also more attractive.
So this is kind of an interesting, so, and I can't take credit for, there was another faculty member in our department said something interesting. And what he said was, because he was teaching one of the intro programming courses, and he said, what I'd really like to have is I would like to be able to get the chat history from, they gave, go solve it with ChatGPT, but let me see your thought process and your interaction with ChatGPT or whatever tool it is, and see everything you did and how you iterated and changed, and to be able to see the thinking that went into the tool. And, you know, when something happened, what was your follow-up? And so I think there's maybe some interesting potential there. And then of course the question was like, you know, I had 100 students or whatever he said he had in his class, like, how do you scale that up? How do you go through and look at this? But like, you know, whereas before you just give them the programming assignment, you can see, oh, they completed it or they didn't complete it. But if you have their whole interaction history, you know, in terms of like dialogue form, it's kind of a new way of thinking about it. So I thought that was a really interesting idea that he had. So maybe some things like that might help get there.
Yeah, I wonder if you could almost replicate that a little bit. Now, maybe you don't get the same feedback, but I could imagine a way of replicating that same process of like, how would you approach this problem, and having a chat set up or something like maybe Brightspace or something integrated where maybe it's not with ChatGPT, or if there's a way to have that, but you can see them working real time. So like these exams become, here's the problem, like work with ChatGPT to solve it, and then you get to the end of it. And maybe that's what things kind of become. And you don't even maybe necessarily even need to sometimes have the full output. Like you could have like, here's the problem, how do you go about solving it? Like what prompts, and you can see then where knowledge is maybe like a gap and things like that. But I really like that idea. The chat history is huge, and if there's a way to have set up structures of assessment that we can then almost kind of mimic in some ways of that process, so we can then evaluate the process. I really like that idea.
And I want to echo that that's a really great idea. But even the oral exam part, just introducing like video recording and having it analyze the transcript for that one, and then having the prompt being able to be spoken aloud. Like you could scale an oral exam to lots of people. So this is that's an app you guys need to build a plug-in thing. My question, actually, I was thinking about what you said, which I loved, about kind of configuring to different learning styles, et cetera, and how, you know, you spend a whole lot of time debugging. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate because I'm not sure this is my position, but with these, you know, knockdown, drag out fights I have with my 11-year-old about, you know, just getting the homework done. What is the value in the struggle in like just the minutia, just like learning, like, you know, sometimes you just do stuff. It's not even fun. You do the dishes because the dishes need to get done. Like I just do it. It's not everything is fun. So what's the balance there for, you know, learners, and especially young learners, just because at some point we will get to this utopian vision, but you're going to have teachers that are not engaging. So you need to learn how to bear and grunt and bear. I don't know. Well, how does that play into this discussion?
I mean, Oh, did you want to?
No, go ahead.
I mean, for me, I think there is a level where there will always be a teaching of the foundational aspects of programming, for example. So I don't think that someone should just jump and start using ChatGPT without ever having like really instructions on like what a for loop is and how you use it and the kind of applications it has. I also think that, I think that really what I'm after when I think about educating students is about problem solving. And I think that's also why I just love programming, because there's so many problems to solve sometimes. Sometimes it can just be in the debugging, like maybe you have a parentheses in the wrong spot, whatever. But sometimes it can be really in the solving of, I need to answer this question. What kind of plot do I need to generate so the answer is clear? Like I could generate these 10 different types of plots, and then maybe I look at a few of them. This one doesn't make sense because of this. This one doesn't make sense because of this. And now I evaluate those plots. And so, I mean, I think that it's really problem solving is the skill, and critical thinking. Those are the skills that I would really like to instill in students. I think they can be developed by programming, and they have been and continue to be. But I think in general, there will be other avenues by which they can also learn these critical thinking and problem solving problems. And number two is, I think as new pieces of technology or programming languages evolve, they're going to be like these little blind spots that pop up with the GPTs where you are talking with ChatGPT a lot, trying to problem solve with it. And so you have the same sort of problem solving and just staying with it kind of experience as you would have kind of on your own and Googling to death. So I think it will still be representative.
Okay, so I'd like to list just two statements and then ask a follow-up question. So for me, what I believe in is the learning process of students is much, much faster with the new capabilities. So this is number one. Number two is, I believe there is a huge gap between what these models can do and what people all around the world need. So my follow-up question is, can we leverage this, for example, by having the students, instead of having a full course just learning, linking these students, for example, with data science for social good, where they can apply what they are learning within the course in a project that actually people will benefit from? Is this possible now?
So this is definitely possible now. And I think Jesse has a slide about an effort that we'll do for data science for social good for this summer, actually, where we'll work with faculty members who are interested in applying these tools and techniques to their work. They will, of course, keep their content, but the actual tools will be open source for everyone. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but what I was wondering is this possible, I mean, to be generalized for courses in general, not necessarily for data science, but I mean, every course has like a tiny impact on the social need.
I really like that. I think it is possible, but also I love the thought that we are working with faculty that are across many disciplines. So if we have like a historian who wants to put ChatGPT or GPT-4 or whatever into their coursework and deliver it in a different kind of way, then that tool is something that could apply in the history domain. Maybe that's something that would also apply in archaeology or in English. And I think that that is the kind of transferability that in generalization that we might be able to see.
I think in the computer science space, it depends a little bit on what the outcome is. If the outcome is something that they use today and they're done, then it's a great model. It can help students, build software that's, can answer a problem today that maybe they wouldn't have had the skills to build or the time to build within a semester. The sort of the harder piece of this is when you build things that aren't, they don't fit within a semester. So you give somebody a piece of software that then they need to use for years, right? Students finish the semester, they're done and they graduate. And so, there is, I think, some ability to create something, but then still you have the handoff and maintenance. And I think this is always a hard piece when you take something and do it within a course, or some type of immersion experience. If you need an answer and you need somebody to go and find an answer or run some experiments or do something like that, those types of things work really well because students could scale up, the types of experiments and simulations, or, they can get answers to more complex questions. But if you need something that's going to have to outlive the course, then you always run into the challenge of, a lot of times the creator needs to own it. And now maybe there's a role that could come in for these types of tools to, support the long term, but that is still, I think, sort of an open question.
Yeah, I just to add a small piece to that. I hope that things can continue to kind of follow this trend of open source, open science, open access to knowledge, because I think that really is a key part to, I think, what you're talking about of if we can continue to make these resources open. Like, I think this is a fantastic thing that people around the world have access to GPT 3.5, right? I know 4, I think, is still mainly US. Yeah. Okay. But I think, the ability to keep things open source, whether it's course materials, teaching materials, or having projects like maybe someone somewhere else can say, hey, like we need this project, and maybe they can find that either they themselves can search and find the tools and resources they need through the open knowledge like databases that exist, or maybe there's awesome places doing data science for social good where there is then open access material or even dedicated teams that can work on some of those projects. So I feel very idealistic and perhaps naive about that happening, but I'm optimistic that these tools can get us there. And I think we have the foundations to put that in practice.
And we'll have our final question.
Hi, I think as Dr. Bell mentioned, like with the COVID as an accelerator, there's more like remote learning, online learning, and there's like completely remote programs, like master programs for computer science, for example. Is it possible for now, for those remote learning, we've never thought of like education to be completely remote. For GPT, is it possible like in the future, there will be program that's almost like 80–90% instructed by GPT? I'm saying like the chat GPT, or like with the plugins that's domain adapted on like specific fields in computer science or like in literature. And the GPT is the only instructor, and the only human part will be the prompt engineering thing that's provided to like the students to how you can interact with ChatGPT, for example. And with that, also like the prompt engineering with how can we like rethink the intellectual property with those prompt engineering we create from professors, I guess. And one final question about that, how we can rethink the interaction between professor and students, and like the classroom setting, like between students, if we have like the program that's instructed like by ChatGPT, for example.
So I think I think it would definitely be interesting to see if you could create sort of your own customized sort of prompts and starting points where you give somebody like a language model, and you have a sequence of maybe prompts that then, seek feedback from the student, and it sort of interactively guides them through a topic where sort of the seed for all of this, and the sort of at certain points, instructor knowledge is injected into the conversation. I think there's probably a lot of really interesting things you could do there. And probably, I think our tooling around this stuff is something that's got to evolve before we could get there. So, like today we're looking at, if you just turn somebody loose with the ChatGPT interface, for a class, and you say, cut and paste this block of text in, and then, start interacting, like you could get them maybe to a certain point, and maybe, a student who's better at that style of learning could go pretty deep into the topic, and maybe you could be completely self-sufficient. But I think you're going to have other students who are going to hit roadblocks or aren't going to explore certain topics in appropriate depth. And, and so I think you would end up with, 100 different paths, and some of them would lead to good outcomes probably, and others wouldn't. And I think to get to that, deeper vision that you kind of hint at, as that we have to have tooling that allows sort of maybe more constrained structured interaction. So we still can put sort of checkpoints in there of like, these things need to happen and let them go and explore, but then they need to be brought back. And that's kind of, you think about an instructor in a lecture, you may have questions and interaction. You may go off in small groups and work together, but then the instructor brings you back and kind of puts things in context and makes sure that everybody's on the same page, explores and follows up on things that the class as a whole is having maybe trouble with, and gives additional detail. And so that sort of flexibility and that sort of adaptation, I think would be really hard to program with the current tools. So if you had somebody who's very, very good with, writing prompts and exploring themselves, they could probably go and replicate that whole process. But doing and what the instructor does of all these different sort of things that somebody's doing, I think would be harder. Now, if somebody goes in and all they do is lecture and they have no interaction and no feedback, well, I mean, I think that was going back to when everybody said, well, MOOCs are going to take over universities, right? It's just pre-recorded, but there's a lot deeper that goes into a course. And I think we're missing the tools to allow somebody, if I had to replicate that in a set of prompts, I don't know how I would program it, yet, but maybe we'll get there sooner.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I think that's the checkpoints, and maybe you kind of give like to give an example. One thing I showed students that they could do is we were learning logistic regression, and here's how you can prompt to get practice problems for logistic regression. And then you still have to write the code, but here's how you can sort of leverage and prompt with this tool to get extra practice steps. So this is where I think going to that next level where you now just say like, first, like you start with the pseudo code for how to code logistic regression, or you start with the pseudo code to program something. And then here's the output that you should get at the end. And you check back in a week and who's getting that output, who's not. And you can maybe go back and see like who's getting stuck where, and you could have people who have solved that problem interact with folks who are maybe getting stuck at certain points, and creating more of that interactive feedback between students as well as instructor feedback. And I think that's something I've been thinking about more, especially as these models get more sophisticated. I think we can really leverage that power.
And I think, Jules, you really nailed it when you said that there are some students that will do really great with one model. There are some students that will do great with another. That which works for one may not work for another. They may prosper in some other area. And I think that's something that we always just need to keep in mind, that someone may actually do great with, I don't know, with this AI sort of driven like tutor, whereas that same person in the classroom might not do great. On the other hand, you have this person that needs like a person to talk to them and interact with them and have that human sort of interaction. And for some reason, it allows them to learn better. And then when they go to this AI agent, then they just kind of, trip and fall. And so I think it's those types of things that we also just need to keep in mind, different strokes for different folks. So.
All right, I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you very much for your time and for your insight. We'll have two more sessions. We're going to take a 10-minute break right now, and then we're going to come back and we're going to hear from Jules White and also Doug Schmidt. We'll hear more about prompt engineering and actually using these tools in the classroom. So let's go ahead and give ourselves 5 minutes, and we'll be back here at 3 o'clock for our final session.